There is a country in Africa that carries a secret right on its face. You look at the flag and feel like you've seen it somewhere before. Red and white stripes, a blue square in the corner, a lone star. It looks like the flag of the United States, but it's not. And the reason behind this similarity is one of the darkest, most contradictory, and disturbing chapters in modern history. This country was created by people fleeing something much worse. It was born out of trauma, a social experiment in which freedom came at a price, with violence and domination. And even today, anyone who travels there can see the traces of all this. Today, Bello Mundo arrives in Liberia, a country that few people know about, but those who do know it never forget it. Number 1. Location and geographical data. Liberia is one of those countries that few people can point out on a map. It is located on the west coast of Africa, bathed by the Atlantic Ocean, between Sierra Leone and Ivory Coast. And although it is small compared to its neighbors, Liberian territory has enormous historical importance, especially for those who study the relationship between Africa and America. The capital is Monrovia, a city named in honor of former U.S. President James Monroe. And this curiosity already gives a clue as to what lies ahead. Unlike most African countries which were colonized by Europeans, Liberia had a totally different origin. But before talking about that, it is worth understanding the natural landscape. The country is covered by tropical forests, wide rivers, coastal plains, and more than 500 kilometers of Atlantic coastline. It has a hot and humid climate, dense vegetation, and impressive biodiversity. And even though it is small in size, it occupies a strategic position on the map, with direct access to the ocean and neighbors on all sides. Today, Liberia is divided into 15 counties, and despite heavy urbanization in some areas, it still retains much of its tribal traditions and rural communities that live isolated between rivers and mountains. And we cannot forget a curious historical detail. For a long time, Europeans called this stretch the Pepper Coast or Grain Coast. This is because it was from here that Guinea pepper, also called paradise grain, was exported, widely used in medieval Europe both as a spice and as medicine. But if there is one thing that draws attention in this country, as much as its diverse geography, it is its history. Number 2. History. Before Liberia existed as a state, this land was already inhabited by 16 different ethnic groups, each with their own traditions, languages, and rules. These were peoples who lived off agriculture, fishing, and local trade. But the turning point in the history of this territory came in the early 19th century, when winds from America brought something unusual. In 1821, an organization called the American Colonization Society was created in the United States, a kind of association formed by politicians, religious leaders, and slave owners. Their goal was controversial: to send black people who had been freed from slavery to Africa on the grounds that they would have a better chance of starting over, far from American racism. However, behind this beautiful rhetoric, there was also an interest in getting rid of a population that was considered troublesome by many people in the United States. In 1822, the first ships arrived on the African coast with freed former slaves. They landed where the country's capital is today and founded a settlement named Monrovia in honor of James Monroe, then President of the United States and one of the supporters of the initiative. Those newcomers were called Americo-Liberians, and they quickly formed a new elite in the territory. They brought habits, clothing, religions, and even forms of government very similar to those of the United States. So, when Liberia declared its independence in 1847, becoming the first republic in Africa, the country adopted a flag similar to the American one, with red and white stripes and a lone star on a blue background. The motto chosen also said a lot about the country's origins. Love of liberty brought us here. However, this freedom was not exactly for everyone. For over a century, the Americo-Liberians remained in power, while the majority of the population, made up of ethnic groups native to the region, was excluded from political decisions. This imbalance eventually exploded. In 1980, a military coup took place, led by an army sergeant named Samuel Doe, who deposed then-President William Tolbert and took control of the country. From then on, Liberia plunged into a dark period. In 1989, the First Civil War broke out, led by a former rebel named Charles Taylor. The conflict lasted 7 years and killed about 250,000 people. And just when it seemed that the country was going to breathe again, another tragedy struck: the Second Civil War between 1999 and 2003. There were more than 300,000 deaths, thousands of wounded and amputees, and a completely destroyed country. Today, anyone walking through the streets of Monrovia, the capital of Liberia, can still see buildings marked by gunfire and people bearing deep scars from those years. On their bodies, in their souls, and in their daily lives, it is common to see residents with physical limitations trying to survive by doing odd jobs or begging for help at city intersections. It is a recent past that cannot be ignored. Reconstruction only really began in 2005, when Liberia elected a woman as president for the first time, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, a Harvard-educated economist who had previously worked at the UN and was internationally respected. She became known as the Iron Lady of Liberia and was one of the main figures responsible for reorganizing the country after the conflicts. In 2011, she received the Nobel Peace Prize for her work in promoting democracy and women's rights. Years later, in 2018, another name surprised everyone by winning the elections: George Weah, a former soccer player idol at Milan and Paris Saint-Germain, elected Best Player in the World in 1995 by FIFA. He became the first athlete to become president of Liberia, and to this day is treated as a national hero. In other words, in less than 50 years, Liberia saw an American elite govern, suffered 2 bloody conflicts, and was then led by a Nobel Prize-winning woman and a soccer star. It is one of the most unpredictable and remarkable trajectories in all of Africa. Number 3. Crises beyond war. But anyone who thinks that Liberia's pain was limited to wars is mistaken. Even after the shooting stopped, other tragedies came in different ways. One of the most devastating occurred between 2014 and 2016. That was when Liberia became the epicenter of one of the greatest health crises of the 21st century: the Ebola outbreak. The virus, highly contagious and with a high mortality rate, spread at an alarming rate. Hospitals were overwhelmed, doctors ran out of equipment, entire families were separated. In a short time, more than 10,000 Liberians were infected. Nearly 5,000 people lost their lives. But the number, as high as it may seem, does not show the extent of the damage. Since then, Liberia has invested in health surveillance, medical training, and emergency response programs. But the fear of the disease remains alive in the collective memory, and all it takes is an untimely cough on a crowded bus to remind us that this ghost still haunts us. Number 4. The people, religion, and social customs. Despite the strong American influence on the country's origins, Liberia's soul is deeply African. Today, the vast majority of the population is made up of indigenous peoples who were there long before the freed slaves arrived from the United States. The country is estimated to have more than 5 million inhabitants, divided into at least 16 major ethnic groups. The largest among them are the Kpele, the Bossa, the Gio, the Kru, the Mano, and the Vai, each with its own language, rituals, and way of organizing itself. The Americo-Liberians, direct descendants of former slaves from America, are now a small minority, but they still have historical influence in government, institutions, and urban culture. For decades, they were the ones who controlled politics and shaped the country in the American style, which caused a lot of friction with the local peoples. The official language of the country is English, but most people also use local languages, especially in rural areas. In some regions, it is possible to hear a sentence mixing 3 different languages, and everyone understands. It is a true linguistic gymnastics of everyday life. In religion, Christianity is predominant. Most churches follow Protestant denominations such as Baptist, Presbyterian, Methodist, and Episcopal. But there is also room for the Catholic faith and Islam, which is more present in the northern regions. However, more than religious labels, what draws the most attention is the way faith manifests itself in everyday life. Churches are everywhere. There is even a Korean church in Monrovia, and on Sundays it is common to see the streets filled with worshippers dressed in their best clothes, leaving services with Bibles in hand and smiles on their faces. It is a true parade of elegance and devotion. For many people, going to church is the highlight of the week. Number 5. Tribes and rituals. While in Liberia's cities you can still see the mark of the United States in yellow taxis, street signs, and even breakfasts of eggs and sausage, just cross into the interior of the country, and the scene changes completely. There, traditions set the tone, many of them older than the country itself. Most communities keep secret societies alive, passed down from generation to generation. The best known are the Poro, for men, and the Sande, exclusively for women. They function as true schools of life, where children and adolescents undergo rituals that mark the end of childhood and the beginning of adulthood. But don't think that these are just symbolic ceremonies. These rituals take place in camps in the forest, with days, sometimes weeks, of isolation, learning about ancestral culture, dances, music, body painting, and practices that outsiders can't even imagine how they work. Poro teaches boys the rules of the community, survival techniques, and even leadership skills. Sande, on the other hand, prepares girls for their role in society, focusing on wisdom, respect, and spirituality. During the rituals, enigmatic figures appear. The women of Sande wear masks carved from wood, with delicate features and symbols of protection. They appear in secret parades, far from the eyes of those who are not part of the group. And among stories and secrets, legends also survive. Some older residents still talk about spirits that inhabit the forests, sacred leaves used for protection, and healing waters. Even with the advance of modernity, these beliefs remain alive. They blend into the present, adapt, but do not disappear. They form the basis of the identity of a people who, despite trauma and difficulties, still find strength in their roots. And since we're talking about roots, the next stop is the kitchen, and there's no shortage of cassava. Number 6. Gastronomy. The basis of the Liberian diet is simple, but full of personality. Rice reigns supreme there. It is present at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So much so that there is even a popular saying that goes, "If there is no rice, it is not a meal." Alongside it is fufu, a dough made from cassava or mashed plantains, which is served with heavy stews that are always very, very spicy. And this is no exaggeration. The Malagueta pepper, the same one that gave its name to the former Pepper Coast, appears in practically every dish. Another highlight is pepper soup, a hot and spicy soup made with meat or fish, and torborgi, made with beans, palm oil, and smoked meats. For breakfast, in addition to rice with sauce, many people eat rice cake with banana, or a kind of sweet farofa made with cassava flour and butter. And although there is American influence in some dishes, such as scrambled eggs and sausage for hotel breakfast, the Liberian flavor really comes from the land, the spices, the pepper, and the palm. Number 7. Nature and places. To end this journey, there is nothing better than talking about Liberia's landscapes, because while the country bears deep marks of history, it is also home to some of the most preserved ecosystems in West Africa. In the southeastern corner of the country lies Sapo National Park, a rainforest so dense and untouched that it seems to have stopped in time. It is the largest park in Liberia, and one of the last large blocks of native forest in the entire region. It is home to rare species, centuries-old trees, and animals that few people in the world have ever seen. One of them is the pygmy hippopotamus, a smaller and much shyer cousin of the hippopotamus that appears in documentaries. It prefers shady corners and hidden swamps and avoids contact with humans as much as possible. It is so discreet that even though it is a national symbol, many Liberians have never seen one up close. Further north on the border with Guinea are the Nimba Mountains. They are over 4,200 feet high and are home to species that only exist in that specific part of the world. It is no coincidence that this mountain range has been recognized as a World Heritage Site by UNESCO. But Liberia is not just about dense forests and sacred mountains. The country has more than 300 miles of Atlantic coastline, with white sand beaches, fishing villages, and scenery that has not yet been taken over by resorts or mass tourism. Among them, Robertsport, a small town in the northwest, stands out. In addition to its peaceful atmosphere, it has become an international surfing spot. It has perfect waves, peaks named after trees, deserted stretches of sand, and an orange sunset that paints the sky behind the surfboard. Those who enjoy alternative destinations consider Robertsport one of Africa's best-kept secrets. But Liberia also has a more industrial side to its landscape. Since 1926, the country has been home to the world's largest rubber plantation, controlled by Firestone. Yes, the same brand as the tires. There are tens of thousands of hectares covered with rubber trees planted in rows, all lined up in perfect lines. Seen from above, the plantation looks like a geometric work of art. But behind this aesthetic, there are also serious discussions about environmental impact and economic dependence. Ultimately, Liberia has it all: dense forests, wild coastlines, mystical mountains, a secret hippopotamus, and landscapes that speak as loudly as its own history. And even if this little piece of the map isn't on your list of destinations, just knowing a little bit about it is enough to understand why so many people still insist on calling Liberia the land of freedom. And so we end our journey through a country of beauty, rich culture, and contrasts that defy any simple idea. What did you think of these curiosities? Tell us in the comments. Thank you for joining us here, and see you on the next adventure through our Bello Mundo.